She had stopped believing anyone would ever choose her. Imara Okafor had made peace with it. At 32 years old, she'd built a life most people would envy. A corner office in a Manhattan marketing firm, an NYU law degree framed on her Brooklyn apartment wall, and a bank account that proved she didn't need anyone to validate her worth. But late at night, when the city quieted to a hum and her phone stayed silent, she felt the weight of that unspoken truth. Successful black women like her were often admired from a distance, never quite chosen up close. She'd learned to wear her independence like armor, telling herself she preferred it that way. The lie was easier than the loneliness. Meanwhile, across the East River in a penthouse that overlooked Central Park, Miles Whitman was drowning in a life that looked perfect from the outside. The tech CEO had everything Manhattan's elite valued: a 8-figure startup exit, venture capitalist parents who opened every door, and a fiancée whose pedigree matched his own. But as he stood in his marble bathroom adjusting his bow tie for yet another charity gala, he caught his own reflection and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he become so hollow? His engagement ring felt like a noose around his plans, his boardroom like a cage painted gold. Everyone expected him to marry the right woman, say the right things, live the right life. And he'd been doing exactly that for 38 years, slowly suffocating under the weight of other people's expectations. Neither of them knew that on a cold November evening, their carefully constructed worlds were about to collide. The Mandarin Oriental ballroom glittered with old money and new ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors where Manhattan's power players gathered for the annual Youth Education Foundation Gala. Imara smoothed down her borrowed navy cocktail dress, feeling slightly out of place among women dripping in diamonds and confidence. She was there representing her firm, checking boxes, making appearances, nothing more. She'd perfected the art of moving through white spaces. Smile bright, shoulders back, never let them see you sweat. She made her way to the hors d'oeuvres table, scanning for familiar faces and finding none. That's when their hands reached for the same shrimp cocktail. "After you," a warm voice said, and Imara looked up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. Miles Whitman, she recognized him vaguely from business magazines, stood before her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, the kind of presence that made people step aside. But his smile was unexpectedly genuine, lacking the calculated charm she'd come to expect from men in rooms like this. "Thank you," she said, and something in the air between them shifted. What happened next shouldn't have mattered. They were just two strangers making small talk at a crowded event. But when Miles asked what brought her there, and Imara mentioned her volunteer work tutoring kids in Bed-Stuy, his expression changed. Not the patronizing interest she usually got, but real curiosity. He told her about a scholarship fund he'd started for STEM students in the Bronx, and suddenly they weren't networking, they were connecting. She laughed at his joke about the jazz band playing the same song for the third time. He noticed the way her whole face lit up when she smiled. Minutes became an hour. The champagne in their glasses went warm. "I love this song," Imara said as a slow melody filled the ballroom. Miles extended his hand. "Dance with me." She should have said no. Should have remembered where she was, who he probably was, all the reasons why men like him didn't choose women like her. But something in his eyes, a loneliness that matched her own, made her take his hand. They moved to the dance floor, and when he pulled her close, the noise of the city seemed to fade. His hand on her lower back felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, with the Manhattan skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, Miles leaned down and kissed her. It was tender, tentative, terrifying, because Imara felt something she'd promised herself she wouldn't feel again. Hope. They pulled apart, breathless, and Miles looked at her like she'd just rewritten his entire future. "I'm really glad I ran into you tonight," he whispered, and Imara wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But she'd been here before. Not exactly here, but close enough to know how these stories ended. She was the interesting diversion, the walk on the wild side, the story he'd tell at dinner parties years from now when he was safely married to someone appropriate. Still, when he asked for her number, She gave it to him. When he texted her the next morning, just thinking about you, she texted back. When he suggested coffee in Central Park that weekend, she said yes, even as her best friend Teresa warned her to be careful, to guard her heart, to remember that fairy tales weren't written for women who looked like them. But here's what Imara didn't know yet. Miles Whitman was already engaged. And here's what Miles didn't know yet. Choosing Imara would cost him everything he'd spent his entire life building. The question is, when love asks you to risk it all, are you brave enough to say yes? Miles texted Imara every morning for a week straight before she finally agreed to see him again. Not because she didn't want to, God, she wanted to, but because she knew better. She'd been the secret before, the complication, the woman men kept in the shadows while they built their real lives in the light. But Miles was persistent in a way that felt different. His messages weren't smooth or calculated. They were vulnerable, honest. I can't stop thinking about you. At 2 in the morning. Tell me I'm not crazy for feeling this way. Over morning coffee. Please give me a chance. When she tried to pull away. And so, against every instinct screaming at her to protect herself, Imara said yes to Central Park on a Saturday afternoon when the autumn leaves were at their peak and the city felt like it was holding its breath. She spotted him by the Bethesda fountain, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, looking more nervous than any CEO should ever look. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that made her chest tighten. You came, he said, like he genuinely doubted she would. They walked together through the park's 843 acres, past joggers and street performers and couples holding hands, and Imara felt the armor she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. Miles asked about her childhood in Brooklyn, her journey through law school, what made her laugh. He didn't perform interest, he actually listened, asking follow-up questions that proved he was paying attention. When she mentioned her volunteer work with inner-city kids, his eyes lit up. He told her about a youth tech expo where he'd given a keynote, how seeing those kids' faces when they coded their first program had been the most meaningful thing he'd done all year. They bought dumplings from a street vendor and argued playfully about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. He made her laugh so hard she snorted, then laughed at herself for snorting, and Miles looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The rain started suddenly, as it does in New York, and Miles opened his umbrella without hesitation, pulling her close under its shelter. They huddled together as raindrops drummed against the fabric, and Imara became acutely aware of his warmth. His cologne, the way his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. He walked her all the way back to her Brooklyn brownstone, neither of them wanting the afternoon to end. On her stoop, with rain still falling and the city noise all around them, Imara kissed him. This time it wasn't tentative. It was hungry, desperate, full of all the loneliness they'd both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Miles pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, I want to know everything about you. But here's what he didn't tell her. He was supposed to be at a wedding venue tasting with his fiancée that afternoon. Here's what he didn't say. His mother had called 3 times during their walk, and he'd silenced every call. Here's what Imara didn't know yet. She was falling in love with a man who belonged to someone else. The next few weeks unfolded like a fever dream. Miles showed up at her office with coffee exactly how she liked it, 2 sugars, oat milk, a shot of vanilla. They met for lunch in quiet corners of the city where no one would recognize him. He texted her song lyrics that reminded him of her, articles about things she cared about, photos of sunrises from his penthouse with the caption, Wish you were here. Imara found herself smiling at her phone in meetings, staying up too late talking to him, rearranging her entire life around the moments they could steal together. Teresa warned her to slow down, to ask more questions, to figure out what she was really getting into. But Imara was already in too deep, already addicted to the way Miles looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Come to my place this Friday, Miles said over the phone one evening, his voice uncertain. I want you to meet some people who matter to me. Imara's stomach flipped. Meeting his people meant something. It meant this wasn't just a fling, wasn't just him slumming it across the bridge for a few weeks of excitement. She said yes before she could overthink it, already planning what she'd wear, how she'd present herself in his world of marble countertops and generational wealth. But when Friday arrived, Miles texted with a change of plans. "Actually, would you mind if I came to you instead? I want to see your world." And so Imara found herself hosting Miles Whitman in her modest Brooklyn apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in family photos and African art. Her closest friends and family came over. Teresa with her loud laugh and no filter, her cousin Marcus who could cook his ass off, her Aunt Beverly who'd practically raised her. They filled the small space with music and food and the kind of love that can't be bought. Imara watched nervously as Miles entered her world, half expecting him to realize she wasn't worth the bridge he'd crossed to get there. But something remarkable happened. Miles didn't perform. He didn't put on the polished charm he probably used in boardrooms. Instead, he helped Marcus in the kitchen, asking genuine questions about jerk seasoning and the right way to make rice and peas. He laughed at Aunt Beverly's stories about Imara as a kid, looking at her with affection that made her want to hide and be seen all at once. When the music shifted to classic R&B, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, some Luther Vandross, Marcus pulled everyone into the living room to dance. Miles hesitated for just a moment before Teresa grabbed his hand and pulled him in. He was terrible at it, all stiff hips and awkward footwork, but he tried with such earnest enthusiasm that everyone ended up laughing with him, not at him. Imara watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart doing something dangerous in her chest. Later, after everyone had left and it was just the two of them cleaning up, Miles pulled Imara close. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me in." And she knew he didn't just mean into her apartment. For the first time since that night at the gala, Imara let herself believe this might actually be real. But real doesn't mean easy. And what neither of them had prepared for was how hard the world would fight to keep them apart. The pushback started subtly. The next week, Miles invited Imara to a rooftop brunch on the Upper West Side with some of his colleagues. She wore her best dress, a deep emerald green that Teresa had helped her pick out, and practiced her small talk on the subway ride there. But the moment she stepped into that sun-drenched space with its panoramic views of the Hudson River and its tables full of people who'd never had to worry about being chosen, she felt the shift. Eyes tracked her movements. Conversations paused as she passed. Miles introduced her warmly. "This is Imara. She's someone very special in my life." But she caught the barely concealed surprise on people's faces. One woman, blonde and impossibly polished, looked her up and down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely," she said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Miles squeezed Imara's knee under the table, grounding her, reminding her she belonged there because he wanted her there. But Imara had been in enough white spaces to recognize the message being sent. "You're not one of us." Still, she tried. She made conversation about her marketing work, asked intelligent questions about their businesses, laughed at the right moments. Miles was attentive, keeping his hand on her back, including her in every discussion. When they stepped to the rooftop's edge to take photos of the view, he wrapped his arms around her from behind and whispered, "You're doing amazing. I'm so proud you're here with me." For a moment, Imara let herself believe the view, both of the city and of their future together, was theirs to claim. But belief is a fragile thing, easily shattered by reality. That Saturday, Imara convinced Miles to come to a street festival in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was alive with music, reggae and gospel and hip-hop spilling from speakers, vendors selling jerk chicken and sweet ginger lemonade, kids dancing in the street while adults clapped along. Miles looked slightly overwhelmed at first, this world so far removed from his controlled environments and curated experiences. But then Imara took his hand and pulled him into the crowd, and she watched something in him relax. He tried the jerk chicken and declared it the best thing he'd ever tasted. He bought them both lemonade from a kid's stand and overtipped with a grin. When the drums started up and people began dancing in the street, Imara dragged him along despite his protests. Miles was still terrible at dancing, worse, somehow, than he'd been in her apartment, but he was laughing, really laughing, in a way that made Imara realize how rarely he probably let himself go like this. An older woman dancing nearby called out, "That's right. Baby, teach your man to move." And everyone around them laughed with joy, not judgment. For those few hours, surrounded by her community's warmth and acceptance, Imara let herself imagine a future where love really could transcend everything they'd been taught to believe about who belonged with whom. But fairy tales don't prepare you for the moment the spell breaks. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into what Imara had started calling, only to herself, only in her most vulnerable moments, their relationship. She was working late at the office when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just a link, no context. Her instinct told her not to click it, but curiosity won. The page loaded slowly, and then there it was. A society blog post with a photo of Miles at some gala, his arm around a stunning blonde woman in a dress that probably cost more than Imara's monthly rent. The headline read, "Tech titan Miles Whitman and fiancée Victoria Ashford announce spring wedding plans." Fiancé. The word hit Imara like a physical blow. She read the article twice, 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. But there it was in black and white. Miles Whitman, the man who'd been texting her good morning every day for weeks, was engaged. Had been engaged. The article was dated 8 months ago, but a quick search revealed more recent photos. Miles and Victoria at a charity auction just 2 weeks before he'd met Imara. Miles and Victoria at a political fundraiser last month. Miles and Victoria looking every bit like the perfect couple Manhattan society expected them to be. Imara's hands shook as she called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Are you engaged?" She cut him off, her voice harder than she'd ever heard it. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. "Imara, I can explain." Miles started, but she hung up before he could finish. She sat at her desk as the office emptied around her, staring at the photos of Miles and Victoria, feeling stupid and used and exactly like every woman who'd ever convinced herself that this time would be different, that she would be the exception. Of course, she wasn't special enough for him to be honest with. Of course, this was exactly what it looked like. A powerful white man having his fun with an exotic detour before returning to his real life. Miles showed up at her apartment an hour later. She buzzed him up only because she wanted to scream at him in person. He stood in her doorway looking wrecked, his usually perfect hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "You lied to me," Imara said, her voice shaking with fury and hurt. "You've been engaged this whole time and you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I was going to tell you," Miles said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. It's complicated." "It's actually very simple," Imara shot back. "You're engaged to someone else. That's not complicated. That's called cheating." "It's not like that," Miles insisted, and Imara saw something desperate in his eyes. "Victoria and that engagement isn't real. It was arranged by our families, expected, something I've been going along with because that's what I do. I go along with things. But then I met you, and for the first time in my life, I felt something real. Something that made me want to stop going along with what everyone expects. So I'm what? Your rebellion? Your walk on the wild side before you settle down with the appropriate choice." Imara's voice broke on the last word. "I'm not some experiment, Miles. I'm a person, and I deserve someone who chooses me from the start, not someone who hides me while he figures out if I'm worth the inconvenience." "You're not an inconvenience," Miles said fiercely. "You're the only thing in my life that feels true. Everything else, the company, the engagement, the perfect life everyone expects, it's all performance. But this, what I feel for you, that's real." "Then end it," Imara challenged. "If I'm real and she's performance, end your engagement. Tell your family. Tell the world. Choose me." Even as she said it, she hated herself for asking, for reducing herself to an ultimatum, for caring enough to give him that power over her. Miles looked at her with anguish in his eyes. "I want to," he said. "God, Imara, I want to. But you don't understand what that means. My family, my company, my entire world, if I end things with Victoria, there will be consequences. My father will. I get it." Imara cut him off, suddenly exhausted. "I'm not worth the consequences." She walked to the door and opened it. "You should go." "Imara, please." "Go, Miles." She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him, she might crumble, and she needed him to leave before he saw exactly how much he'd broken her. After he left, Imara slid down against the door and let herself cry. Not pretty tears, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. She'd known better. Had known from the start that men like Miles didn't choose women like her when it actually cost them something. But she'd let herself hope anyway, and now she was paying the price for that hope. What Imara didn't know was that across the bridge, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Miles was having a reckoning of his own. He stood at his window watching the city lights blur through unshed tears, Victoria's name lighting up his phone over and over. He'd stopped answering her calls 3 weeks ago, stopped pretending to be excited about wedding planning, stopped going through the motions of a life that felt like death. Meeting Imara hadn't just woken something in him, it had shown him he'd been sleepwalking through his entire existence. Every boardroom meeting where he said what investors wanted to hear, every family dinner where he performed the role of dutiful son, every moment with Victoria where he felt absolutely nothing. Imara had made all of it unbearable by showing him what it felt like to actually be alive. But being alive meant risking everything. It meant disappointing his parents who'd built their empire expecting him to expand it. It meant facing his board who'd already expressed concerns about stability and public image. It meant becoming the subject of gossip columns and losing the respect of people whose opinions he'd spent his whole life trying to earn. It meant accepting that choosing Imara would cost him his carefully constructed world. The question was she worth it? Miles knew the answer, had known it from the moment she snorted while laughing at his joke in Central Park. Had known it watching her move through her Brooklyn apartment with confidence and grace, surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was. Had known it every time she challenged him, saw through his polish, demanded he be real. Imara was worth everything. The problem was whether he was brave enough to pay the price. 3 days passed with no contact between them. Imara threw herself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the apartment where every corner reminded her of Miles. Teresa came over with wine and ice cream and refrained from saying, "I told you so," which Imara appreciated even as part of her wished someone would just confirm that she'd been an idiot to believe. Her Aunt Beverly called and told her firmly, "You are not defined by who chooses you or doesn't choose you. You are whole on your own." Imara wanted to believe her, but at night, alone in bed, she kept reaching for her phone to text Miles before remembering she couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. Miles, meanwhile, was unraveling. His assistant commented that he seemed distracted in meetings. His father left increasingly concerned voicemails. Victoria showed up at his office demanding to know what was going on, why he'd become so distant, whether he was having second thoughts about the wedding. And Miles, who'd spent 38 years saying what people wanted to hear, found himself unable to lie anymore. "I can't marry you," he told Victoria in his office. The city spread out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I'm sorry. You deserve better than someone who's just going through the motions." Victoria's face went through several expressions: confusion, hurt, anger, before landing on something harder. "There's someone else, isn't there?" When Miles didn't answer, she laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. That woman from the gala? The one you've been sneaking around with?" "Her name is Imara," Miles said quietly. "And I wasn't sneaking. I was slumming it," Victoria finished coldly. "Having your little adventure before settling into real life?" "Miles, we've been planning our wedding for months. Our families have deposits down at venues. The invitations are being printed. You can't just—" "I'm sorry," Miles repeated, meaning it. "This isn't fair to you. But marrying you when I'm in love with someone else would be even more unfair." The words hung in the air between them. In love. He hadn't even said it to Imara, but he'd just said it to Victoria, making it real and terrifying and irrevocable. Victoria stood, her composure cracking. "You're making a huge mistake," she said. "You think your little Brooklyn fling is going to fit into your world? You think she can handle the pressure, the scrutiny, the expectations? You're destroying everything for someone who doesn't even belong." "Get out," Miles said, his voice hard. "Get out of my office." After Victoria left, Miles sat in the silence of his corner office and realized he'd just set fire to his entire life. And he felt lighter than he had in years. But if Miles thought breaking off his engagement would be enough, he was about to learn exactly how hard the world fights to protect its hierarchies. The news broke within hours. Somehow, probably Victoria's doing, society blogs picked up the story. Tech CEO Miles Whitman calls off society wedding amid scandal. The speculation was immediate and vicious. Photos of Miles and Imara from the gala surfaced online, grainy and damning. Whitman's mystery woman identified as Brooklyn marketing executive Imara Okafor. One headline read, her LinkedIn photo plastered across gossip sites like evidence of wrongdoing. The comment sections filled with exactly what Imara had feared. People questioning what he saw in her, whether she'd trapped him somehow, speculation about her motivations that all boiled down to the same racist undertone. She didn't belong in his world, and he must have been manipulated into choosing her. Imara's phone exploded. Friends checking in, co-workers asking if she was okay. Her mother calling in a panic because someone had shown her the articles. "Immy, baby, what have you gotten yourself into?" her mother asked, worry heavy in her voice. These people, they're not going to let this go quietly. She was right. By the next morning, Imara couldn't walk into her office without feeling eyes on her. Co-workers who'd been friendly suddenly found reasons to avoid the break room when she was there. In a meeting, she pitched an idea and watched her boss's eyes slide past her like she hadn't spoken. After, a colleague pulled her aside with false concern. "Just checking in. Things must be really crazy for you right now. Are you doing okay?" But Imara heard the real question underneath. "Are you really dating Miles Whitman? How did you manage that?" The worst came when she stopped for coffee on her way home. The barista recognized her from the photos online and loudly asked her friend, "Isn't that the girl who broke up that engagement?" Imara left without her coffee, cheeks burning, fighting tears until she made it back to her apartment. She finally answered Miles's calls that evening, and he sounded destroyed. "Imara, I'm so sorry. I didn't think Victoria would. I didn't expect it to blow up like this. Are you okay?" "No," Imara said honestly. "I'm not okay, Miles. I'm being publicly humiliated. People at my job are treating me like I'm some kind of homewrecker. My mother is worried sick. And her voice broke. "I don't know if I can do this. If we can do this." "Don't say that," Miles pleaded. "Please. I know this is hard. But hard." Imara laughed without humor. "Hard is an understatement. Do you understand what this is like for me? You get to be the powerful CEO who followed his heart. I get to be the black woman who seduced you away from your respectable fiancé. That's the story everyone's telling, Miles. And I can't just decide one day that it's not worth it and walk back into my old life. This follows me now." Miles was quiet for a long moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time," Imara said, even though it hurt to say it. "I'm saying maybe everyone's right. Maybe we're from worlds too different to bridge. Maybe this costs more than either of us can afford to pay." "I don't accept that," Miles said fiercely. "I don't accept that we have to let other people's judgment determine our lives." "Easy to say when you're the one with power," Imara shot back. "When has the world ever told you that you don't belong somewhere?" The silence stretched between them, full of everything they couldn't say, everything they might not be able to overcome. "I need space," Imara finally said. "Please respect that." She hung up before he could respond, before she could hear the hurt in his voice and take it all back. Because here was the truth she was finally facing. Loving Miles required more courage than she knew if she possessed. It required believing she deserved to be chosen even when the entire world seemed determined to prove otherwise. It required trusting that what they felt for each other could survive the weight of societal judgment, family pressure, and the constant message that she wasn't enough. And Imara wasn't sure she was that brave. The next 2 weeks were the longest of her life. She stopped checking social media, where strangers still dissected her relationship and found her lacking. She threw herself into work with manic energy, determined to prove she was more than Miles Whitman's controversial girlfriend. She went to dinner with Teresa and pretended everything was fine even as her heart felt like it was breaking in slow motion. And she didn't contact Miles, even though she wanted to, even though she dreamed about him. even though some mornings she woke up reaching for her phone before remembering she'd asked for space. Miles, for his part, was coming undone in his own way. His father invited him to dinner and spent 2 hours explaining why pursuing Imara was professional suicide. His investors called concerned meetings about optics and stability. His mother sent a long email full of concern for his well-being that really meant concern for what the neighbors would say. Friends from his world stopped calling. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. The board started making noise about leadership that reflects company values, which was code for "Stop making us look bad." And Victoria launched a full campaign. She gave a tearful interview to a society magazine about betrayal and being blindsided, painting herself as the victim and Miles as reckless. The article implied, without quite saying it, that Imara had been the aggressor, the temptation that led a good man astray. It was insidious, effective, and it made Miles want to burn his entire world down. Because here's what he'd learned in those 2 weeks without Imara. Nothing else mattered. Not his company, not his social standing, not his parents' approval. He'd been dying slowly his entire life, suffocating under expectations, and Imara had been the first breath of real air he'd ever taken. Losing her felt like going back underwater, and he wasn't willing to drown anymore. So Miles made a decision that would either save him or destroy him completely. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, Miles called an emergency board meeting. His assistant tried to talk him out of it. His father called and demanded to know what he was planning. His lawyer sent an email with "urgent" in the subject line. But Miles ignored them all. He walked into that boardroom in his best suit, his heart hammering but his mind clear, and he looked at the 15 people who'd helped build his company into an empire. "I'm resigning as CEO," he announced without preamble. Effective immediately. The room erupted. Board members talked over each other, demanding explanations, asking if he'd lost his mind, invoking bylaws and contractual obligations. Miles let them rage for a moment before raising his hand for silence. "I've spent my entire life doing what I was supposed to do," he said, his voice steady. "Building the right company, dating the right woman, making the right choices for everyone but myself. And I'm done. I can't lead this company honestly when I'm living a lie. I can't marry someone I don't love. I can't keep pretending that the life you all want for me is the life I want for myself. This is about that woman," his father said from across the table, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You're throwing away everything we've built for." "For love," Miles interrupted. "I'm choosing love over performance, authenticity over approval, my own happiness over your expectations. And if that makes me reckless or irresponsible or whatever else you're thinking, I can live with that. What I can't live with is losing the only person who's ever made me feel like myself." He didn't wait for their response. He placed his resignation letter on the table, turned, and walked out of the room. In the elevator down to the lobby, his hands finally started shaking. He just torched his career, disappointed his family, and made himself the subject of even more tabloid speculation. His phone was already blowing up with messages from board members, investors, his parents. By evening, the story would be everywhere. Manhattan CEO quits company for controversial girlfriend. But as Miles stood on the sidewalk outside his office building, snow beginning to fall on the city he'd always called home, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: free. Now he just had to convince Imara that what they had was worth fighting for, that love could triumph over fear, that sometimes the biggest risk leads to the greatest reward. The question was, would she be brave enough to take that risk with him? Would Imara answer the door? That was the only question that mattered to Miles as he stood on her Brooklyn stoop that snowy Friday evening, his resignation letter still burning a hole in his pocket, his entire world reduced to whether the woman he loved would give him one more chance. He'd texted her an hour ago, just 3 words, "Please let me in," and she'd responded with an address and a time. Nothing more. No promises. No reassurances. Just the possibility of a conversation, which was more than he deserved after everything she'd endured because of him. The door opened, and there she was. Imara looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. her natural hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing sweatpants and an oversized NYU hoodie that somehow made her even more beautiful. She didn't smile, didn't invite him in with warmth, just stepped aside and let him enter her apartment. The space felt different now, heavier, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "You shouldn't be here," Imara said quietly, closing the door behind him. "The press is probably following you. Someone's going to see you coming to my place and it'll just fuel more." "I don't care," Miles interrupted. "I don't care about the press or what anyone thinks anymore. I only care about you." He pulled the resignation letter from his pocket and handed it to her. "I quit today. Walked into the board meeting and resigned as CEO." Imara stared at the paper in her hands like it was written in a foreign language. "You, what?" "Miles, what did you do?" "What I should have done the moment I met you," he said. "I stopped living for everyone else and started living for myself. For us. I told them I couldn't lead honestly while living a lie. I told them I was choosing love over everything they expected from me." He took a step closer and she didn't move away. "Imara, I know the last few weeks have been hell. I know you've suffered because of me, because of my cowardice in not ending things with Victoria sooner. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me. But I'm here now with nothing. No company, no perfect life, no approval from anyone who matters to my old world. And I'm asking you to take a chance on me anyway." Imara's hands were shaking as she set the letter down on her coffee table. "Do you understand what you're asking me?" Her voice cracked. "You're asking me to believe that this is real, that you won't wake up in 6 months and regret everything you gave up for me. You're asking me to trust that I'm enough, that I'm worth all of this chaos. And Miles, I've spent my whole life being told in 1,000 subtle ways that I'm not enough. That women who look like me don't get the fairy tale ending. That powerful men don't choose us when it costs them something real. You are enough," Miles said fiercely, closing the distance between them. "You're more than enough. You're everything. And I'm not asking you to believe it because I say it. I'm asking you to believe it because I'm showing you. I burned my old life down, Imara. I walked away from everything I've ever known because nothing in that world matters without you in it." Tears were streaming down Imara's face now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared that I'm going to believe you, that I'm going to let myself fall completely, and then I'll catch you," Miles said, taking her face in his hands. "Every single time. For the rest of our lives, I'll catch you. That's what love is, isn't it? Choosing each other even when it's terrifying, even when the world tells you not to, even when it costs you everything." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you, Imara. I should have said it weeks ago. I love you, and I'm choosing you, and I will keep choosing you every day for as long as you'll let me." Imara looked up at him through tears, searching his face for any hint of doubt or reservation. She found none. What she found instead was a man who looked as scared and vulnerable as she felt. A man who'd risked everything on the belief that what they had was worth fighting for. And in that moment, looking into Miles Whitman's eyes in her small Brooklyn apartment with snow falling outside and the whole world probably judging them, Imara made a choice too. "I love you too," she said, and kissed him. It was different from their first kiss at the gala, less tentative, more certain. It was a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and the terrifying courage it takes to trust someone with your whole heart. When they finally pulled apart, Miles was smiling through his own tears. "So what now?" Imara asked, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're unemployed. I'm the most gossiped about woman in New York, and we've probably got photographers camped outside my building. What's the plan?" Miles laughed too, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard from him. "Honestly, I have no idea, but we'll figure it out together." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like he was never letting go. "Together?" he repeated, and Imara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, peace. But choosing each other was just the beginning. Now they had to face the world that had tried so hard to keep them apart. The next morning, Miles woke up on Imara's couch where he'd fallen asleep after they'd talked until 3 in the morning about everything. Their fears, their hopes, what building a life together might actually look like. His phone had 73 missed calls and twice as many messages. The news of his resignation had exploded overnight. Business publications were calling it stunning and unprecedented. Society blogs were having a field day with speculation. His mother had left a voicemail that was equal parts concern and fury. His father had texted just 2 words, "Call me." Miles ignored them all. Instead, he watched Imara sleep in her bedroom through the half-open door, her face peaceful in the early morning light, and he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. When Imara woke up and found him making coffee in her kitchen, badly, but with endearing effort, she smiled in a way that made his chest ache. "So you're really here," she said. "I was half afraid I dreamed last night." "I'm really here," Miles confirmed, handing her a mug. "And I was thinking, we should probably leave town for a few days. Let the initial media frenzy die down. Give ourselves some space to breathe without photographers following our every move." Imara raised an eyebrow. "Running away? Strategic retreat," Miles corrected with a grin. "There's a difference." So they did something neither of them had done in years. They played hooky from their lives. Miles rented a car, and they drove upstate to a small inn near the Catskills that his grandmother used to take him to as a child. No press, no expectations, no one who recognized them or cared about their story. Just 2 people learning how to be together without the weight of the world pressing down on them. Those 3 days felt like a gift. They hiked through snow-covered woods, had snowball fights like kids, stayed up late by the fireplace talking about everything and nothing. Miles told Imara about his childhood, the pressure he'd always felt to be perfect, the loneliness of having everything and feeling nothing. Imara shared her own stories, growing up in a community that loved her fiercely but also worried constantly about the world she'd have to navigate. The exhaustion of always having to prove herself in spaces that weren't built for her. They were honest in ways that felt dangerous and necessary, building the foundation of trust that had been fractured by secrecy and fear. On their last evening there, as they sat by the fire with mugs of hot chocolate, Imara asked the question that had been haunting her. "Do you regret it? Giving everything up?" Miles was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret not doing it sooner," he finally said. "I regret every day I wasted living for other people's approval. But walking away from that life to be with you, that's the first thing I've done in 38 years that I'm genuinely proud of." "What about your family?" Imara pressed. "Your father hasn't spoken to you. Your mother keeps calling. That has to hurt." "It does," Miles admitted. "But they'll come around eventually. And if they don't," he took her hand, "then I'll build a new family. With you." Imara's eyes filled with tears again. Happy ones this time. "You can't just say things like that and expect me not to cry." Miles pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Imara Okafor, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." But when they returned to the city the following week, reality was waiting for them with sharp teeth. The Thanksgiving holiday had given the media time to sharpen their narratives. Think pieces had been written about interracial relationships and power dynamics. Commentators debated whether Miles had made a midlife crisis mistake. Message boards dissected Imara's appearance, her credentials, whether she was really accomplished or just benefiting from diversity initiatives. It was exhausting and invasive and exactly what Imara had feared. At work, things got worse before they got better. Her boss called her into his office and, with obvious discomfort, suggested she might want to take some personal time until the attention died down. It wasn't quite firing her, but it felt close enough. Imara held her head high as she left his office, refusing to let anyone see how much it hurt. But that night, alone in her apartment before Miles came over, she cried angry tears at the unfairness of it all. She'd done nothing wrong, had just fallen in love, and yet she was being punished for it in ways Miles, with all his privilege, would never fully understand. When she told him about work, Miles wanted to fight. "That's discrimination," he said hotly. "They can't force you out because of who you're dating." "They're not forcing me out," Imara said tiredly. "They're strongly suggesting I make things easier for everyone. And maybe they're right. Maybe I do need some distance from this circus." "Don't let them make you feel like you did something wrong," Miles said. taking her hands. You deserve to work where you're valued, not tolerated. And that conversation planted a seed. Over the next few weeks, as Imara took the personal time her boss had suggested, she started thinking about what she actually wanted. She'd been climbing the corporate ladder for years, checking boxes, proving herself in spaces that barely made room for her. But what if she stopped trying to fit into other people's structures and built something of her own? Miles was going through his own reckoning. Without the CEO title, without the company that had defined him for a decade, he had to figure out who he actually was. He started volunteering at the same youth program where Imara had been tutoring, teaching kids coding and entrepreneurship. He discovered he loved it. Loved seeing their faces light up when they understood a concept. Loved being valued for what he could give rather than what he represented. He also started going to therapy, working through decades of trying to be what everyone else needed him to be. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, they built a life together. Christmas came, and Miles's grandmother, the one who'd told everyone at Thanksgiving how she'd never seen him smile like this, invited them both to her home in Connecticut. When they arrived, nervous and holding hands, they found not just his grandmother waiting but also his mother. She looked older than Miles remembered, tired around the eyes. "Mom," Miles said carefully. His mother studied Imara for a long moment, and Imara stood tall, refusing to shrink under her gaze. Finally, his mother spoke. "I've been very angry with you, Miles. Angry at what I thought was recklessness and disrespect for everything your father and I built." She paused. "But your grandmother helped me understand something. She told me that she'd raised me to believe love should look a certain way, come from certain people, fit certain expectations. And she said she was wrong to teach me that." His mother's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to lose my son because I'm too stubborn to see what makes him happy." Miles's throat tightened. "Mom, I'm not saying this will be easy," his mother continued. "I'm not saying I understand everything or that I don't have my own prejudices to work through, but I'm saying I'm willing to try. For you." And she turned to Imara. "If you're willing to be patient with an old woman learning to be better, I'd like to get to know you." Imara felt Miles squeeze her hand, felt his hope and fear in that touch. She thought about her own mother's words weeks ago. Love shouldn't require you to make yourself smaller. And she realized that Miles's mother wasn't asking her to shrink. She was asking for a chance to grow. "I'd like that too," Imara said softly. It wasn't perfect. His father still refused to visit, called Miles's choices disappointing, intense phone conversations. Some of Miles's old friends never called back. Victoria gave another interview, this one more bitter, and the comment sections remained vicious. But on Christmas morning, watching Miles's mother tentatively show Imara old photo albums of Miles as a child, watching his grandmother beam with pride at both of them, Imara felt something shift. Maybe they didn't need everyone's approval. Maybe they just needed the people who were willing to choose love over comfort. January brought unexpected opportunities. A venture capitalist who'd read about Miles's resignation reached out with a proposition. Would he be interested in starting a nonprofit focused on tech education for underserved communities? No board oversight, full creative control, a mission he actually believed in. Miles said yes before even hearing the full pitch. And when he told Imara, she had news of her own. She'd been offered a position as Director of Diversity and Inclusion at a progressive marketing firm that actually seemed to value what she brought to the table. "Look at us," Imara laughed as they celebrated with Chinese takeout in her apartment. "Getting our lives back together. Better than they were before," Miles corrected, pulling her close. "Everything's better now." But there was still one thing Miles wanted to make official. On a cold Saturday in late January, Miles asked Imara to meet him at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. She arrived bundled in her winter coat, confused about why he'd chosen such a random location in the middle of winter. The garden was nearly empty, the trees bare and the ground dusted with snow. "What are we doing here?" she asked, breath misting in the cold air. Miles took both her hands, and she noticed he was trembling. Not from cold but from nerves. "This is where I want to marry you," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Imara's breath caught. "Miles, I know it's fast," he rushed on. I know we've only been together a few months, and most of that has been chaos. But I also know I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're it for me, Imara. You're the person I want to build everything with, the quiet moments and the big dreams and everything in between. So I'm asking you here, in this garden in winter, if you'll marry me. We can have a long engagement if you want, or we can do it tomorrow. I don't care about the timeline. I just need you to know that I'm all in. Forever. He pulled out a ring. Not the massive diamond his world would expect, but a simple, elegant band with a deep blue sapphire. It reminded me of the dress you wore the night we met, he explained quietly. Imara looked at the ring, then at Miles's face. Open and vulnerable and so full of hope it made her chest ache. She thought about how far they'd come, how much they'd risked, how hard they'd fought to get here. She thought about the girl she'd been months ago, convinced she'd never be chosen, and the woman she was now, standing in a winter garden with a man who'd given up everything to choose her. Yes, she said, and watched his face transform with joy. Yes, I'll marry you. Miles slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that warmed them both despite the cold. When they pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Imara looked around at the bare trees and snow-covered paths. We're really doing this, she said, half question, half wonder. We're really doing this, Miles confirmed. Want to get married right now? Imara laughed. Right now? Why not? Miles said, suddenly excited. Let's just do it. Small ceremony, just our closest people, right here in this garden. No media circus, no months of planning and stress. Just us and the people we love most, making this official. It was impulsive and romantic and completely insane, which is probably why Imara said yes. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon when the garden was still winter quiet but the sun was finally breaking through gray clouds, Imara Okafor married Miles Whitman. Her mother was there, and her Aunt Beverly, and Teresa, who played violin while crying happy tears. Marcus came with half their Brooklyn crew, and Miles's grandmother sat in the front row next to his mother, who'd brought flowers and an apology for taking so long to come around. His father wasn't there, and that hurt Miles in ways he'd probably processed for years, but his sister showed up and that meant everything. They'd written their own vows. Miles spoke about courage and honesty and choosing love over fear every single day. Imara talked about being seen and valued and building a life that honored both their truths. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers that echoed through the quiet garden. Afterward, they had a reception at a Brooklyn restaurant that served soul food and craft cocktails, where two very different worlds collided and, for one evening at least, danced together. Miles's mother sat next to Imara's mother, and they found common ground in sharing embarrassing childhood stories. Teresa taught Miles's grandmother how to do a line dance. Marcus made Miles try jerk chicken so spicy he needed 3 glasses of water. It was chaotic and beautiful and exactly what their wedding should be. A celebration of two people brave enough to build a bridge between worlds. That evening, as the party wound down and guests started heading home, Miles and Imara slipped away to the Brooklyn Heights promenade. They stood at the railing, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. The city where they'd met, where they'd struggled, where they'd chosen each other again and again despite everything. We did it, Imara said softly, leaning into Miles's warmth. We did, Miles agreed, wrapping his arms around her. And we're going to keep doing it. Every day, for the rest of our lives. Imara turned in his arms to face him. I need you to know something, she said seriously. This isn't going to be easy. People are still going to judge us. We're still going to face obstacles, maybe forever. There will be days when you wonder if it was worth it, when the cost feels too high. I know, Miles said. And on those days, I'll remember this moment. I'll remember how it felt to watch you walk toward me in that garden. I'll remember the way you challenged me to be brave, to be honest, to be myself. And I'll know that yes, it was worth it. You're always going to be worth it. The city lights reflected in Imara's eyes as she smiled up at him. I choose you, she said. Every day. In every way, I choose you. And I choose you, Miles replied. Always. They kissed as the city hummed around them, Two people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided that love, real, courageous, inconvenient love, was the most powerful choice they could make. Because here's what Imara and Miles learned. Being chosen isn't about someone deciding you're worth the convenience. It's about finding someone brave enough to fight for you when it costs them something. It's about standing together when the world says you don't fit. It's about building your own definition of home, family, and happiness instead of accepting someone else's narrow vision. Their story wasn't perfect. Miles's father eventually came around, but it took 2 years and a grandchild. Imara's non-profit consulting firm became successful, but she still faced discrimination and doubt. They had arguments and hard days and moments when the gap between their upbringings felt impossible to bridge. But they kept choosing each other, kept showing up, kept believing that what they'd built together was stronger than what they'd given up. And maybe that's the real lesson, that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to be imperfect with you, someone who'll risk everything not because you're worth the convenience but because you're worth the fight. Imara Okafor had given up on being chosen. But she learned that sometimes giving up is just making room for the right person to prove you wrong. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with certainty, they start with courage. And sometimes, in a city of 8 million people, two worlds collide and create something entirely new, something that belongs only to them. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you chose courage over comfort? When was the last time you fought for something or someone that everyone said wouldn't work? Because Imara and Miles' story isn't really about interracial love or class differences or overcoming obstacles. It's about the moment we all face when we have to decide. Will we live for other people's approval, or will we risk everything for what makes us truly alive? Drop a comment and tell me about a time you chose love over fear, when you took a leap of faith that everyone said was crazy. Or tell me what you think. Could you have done what Miles did? Could you have trusted like Imara did? Let's talk about it because stories like this matter. They remind us that we're all just trying to find someone brave enough to choose us, and to be brave enough to choose them back. And if this story moved you, if it made you believe in the power of courageous love, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things for love. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're worth fighting for, that being chosen isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. Because at the end of the day, we're all Imara, hoping someone sees us fully and chooses us anyway. And we're all Miles, hoping we have the courage to choose authentically when it costs us everything. The question is, when your moment comes, will you be brave enough to say yes?